I love you to bit.
Hello again, my dear friend. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. As I was saying to you before, I'm in my traveling clothes because I'm about
Yes,
to head on the road, so I forget
yes.
the garb. But it's great to see you, and I wouldn't miss a time to connect with you for anything. So yeah,
Well, thank you. And I feel the very same. We are kindred spirits and we've become so much more good friends. And I'm so grateful for you and these conversations. And it's funny because when I thought, okay, today, I always sort of leave room to think, what do I need to share today? What do I need to ask? And then today I just came and thought, I don't know, we'll see what happens or what pops up. And obviously, we know what we need to talk about because I always have the intention of sharing something, and I always know it's a healing for me or something I need to hear, and someone else does as well. Right? It's a win-win. It's beautiful. And we were talking briefly about when there's a memorial or something, and one of the most beautiful, whether heartwarming, heart-wrenching, happy, grief, joy, all of it, important parts is sharing stories,
yes,
right? And I mentioned when I attended your webinar, and you gave me my aha moment of the fact that as we are mourning, we can be crying, we can be angry, and we can be laughing, and we can be remembering. And I remember when our best man at our wedding. So I'll make a long story short. My husband went to camp for 11 years. Then our children, this will be their 13th year. I didn't know why I was so in love with camp. So I went to be the nurse there for one season to just try to figure out what the heck he loved so much about this camp. Well, I fell in love with camp and I stayed for 5 years. But when we were getting married, I said, he didn't have like one close friend. And I said, who would be your friend? And he said, of course, it's Keith, because he was his camp counselor at this camp and became his friend. And so he was our best man. And sadly, Keith died just there was no forewarning, no illness that people were aware of. And he was quite young. I think he was 40, not even going to be 40. So one of the things that stayed with me is they made this Facebook page in memory of Keith. Every year they have a ritual of honoring him on his birthday. My husband drinks this drink called a stinky squirrel, which is like rye and Dr. Pepper, and he says it's disgusting. Thanks a lot, Keith. And as he's drinking it, and he posts about, well, I'm drinking the stinky squirrel. And this was like 10 years ago. And their friends and their family are still sharing stories. And his parents said, hearing the stories from other people, the Keith we didn't know, we weren't with him at camp. We didn't, hearing all of these stories has brought them so much joy. And I would invite everyone, when someone says, oh, stop talking about it, never stop sharing stories. Do you agree with that? I already know
100%.
you do.
100%. Well, healthy mourning, the whole point of healthy mourning is to recognize that the relationship hasn't died with the person, that their physical being died, but the relationship continues to grow. And one of the ways that the relationship continues to grow is through stories and discovering who the person was beyond the person that I saw, that I knew. So when the parents are saying, thank you for helping me to see my son through different eyes,
Mm.
through the eyes of who you knew him to be, because it's how we discover all of who they were. It's how we
Mm-hmm.
honor all of who they were. And it continues our relationship with them, because then it's like, well, I never knew that you did such and such and what
You
have
keep
you.
learning about them.
Yes, you learn about who they were and who they aspired to be. You sometimes learn about facets of them that you never knew, things that were important to them that you never knew. When a friend says something like, well, we love to go play tennis. Well, I never saw him pick up a
You're like,
racket. What,
what? Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
And so we get a whole new picture. And instead of it being locked in time at the time of the death, and this is who we knew them to be, and so we seal off who we knew them to be, the stories help us to open that and unpack that and discover who they were. And in doing that, we discover where our relationship with them is now, which
Oh,
the healing process. That is how grief heals. Because there's this concept that, I'm going to love them forever. Of course, you're going to love them forever.
yeah.
Therefore, I'm going to grieve forever. Not true. Grief was never meant to be a place that you stay. Grief is a journey, and it's a human process. And it's a process from having physical relationship with them to moving to a new relationship that you can't even imagine. And the grief journey is the journey from one to the other, right? And
Oh
the
my
way that
goodness.
we do it is we do it through mourning. When we convert our grief to mourning, we're moving through the process. When we lock down in the grief, or we claim the grief as I'll be grieving forever, then we actually resist and push back against mourning.
Oh my goodness.
Telling the stories is mourning, because telling the
Yes.
stories is the external expression of what's going on the inside.
Oh my
So
God, I love that so much.
it's a
Yeah.
beautiful way to mourn.
And it's interesting because I want to have this on billboards, because it is a very hard sell. Truthfully, it is a hard sell because we, sorry, elephant in the room. Sorry, everyone. I know this is hard to hear. We celebrate the martyr. We celebrate the person who is cloaked in darkness forever, because that, in our opinion, in our belief, shows how much they love the person, right? If you are no longer able to function, oh my gosh, like that's how much you love them. You can't live without. When I hear people say, oh my gosh, I can't live without them, and I now say to them, oh my goodness, well, what can you do to change that? Right? Like when we build our lives to say, I can't live a good life without this person, and if they die, I will never be happy again. That does not show. It shows that we are ill prepared for what is going to happen, because someone's going to die first.
I approach it in a slightly different way. Instead of what can we do to change that, I say, of course you can't live without them, but the grief journey is about finding where they are.
Okay, there you
Grief
go.
journey
See,
is
true.
finding where they are and where your relationship is with them, because you're not meant to live without them.
There's no
You
closure, like you
you,
said
you
before.
will be living without their physical presence.
Physical.
That's not
Mm,
living without them. And as long as you keep it
mm,
contained to, if they're not physically with me, then I'm not with them, then you prevent the healing piece of it. You prevent yourself from
mm.
feeling connected with them again.
Oh my goodness, you're
And that's so
so
sad
right.
and so hard, so sad and so hard. And of course, if we think that my job in grief is to get over them and to
Mm,
live without them, then every
mm.
part of our being is saying, no,
No,
that's,
thank you. I don't want to do that.
yeah,
Right,
because
right, right.
it's wrong.
How smart
it's
you are.
it's our misperception of what grief is asking of us.
Mm.
It's not that we need to grieve to let them go. It's that we need to grieve in order to find where they are. And when we find where they are, then letting go of the physical becomes so much easier, because I know where you are. I don't need this physical reminder of you anymore. And the physical stuff starts to remarkably drop away in ways that we can't even imagine.
So when you say, okay, so I love this, and I mean, it's funny because I kind of live it, and I look around at all the trinkets I have that remind me of those who've died who I love, and pictures, and I'll tell stories. So when you say where they are now, you're not talking about heaven. You're not talking about, what do you like when you say where, what your role, or what the grief process to help you define or figure out where they are now. What you mean is your relationship with
Right.
them, not
Correct.
like
That's
heaven.
right.
I hope they're
The
not
job is
down
to
there.
find, correct.
You
The
know,
job is to find where the relationship is now.
relationship is.
Where the relationship is now. And I say where they are now from the perspective of in relation to me.
There you
How,
go.
how do I
See,
how
that's,
do I connect with you? How
yeah.
do I feel your presence? It's interesting because this week in the Healthy Mourning program, the conversion technique that we're talking about is honoring. It's called honor and altar. Altar,
Right.
ALTAR.
Yes. Yeah.
The pictures and the creation of an altar for somebody.
Yes.
But one of the things we talked about this week was the importance of refreshing the altar. So we refresh an altar when we recognize that that picture that I've been staring at and now I look through because I don't even see it anymore, it's done its job. I found a little bit of where the relationship is now, and now I can actually integrate this picture back into my world. I can put it back into a spot that is right for it, but it no longer needs to be the altar. Maybe the altar needs to be something else now, or maybe the altar needs to move outside my house. Now, often this is when somebody who's had ashes in a particular place now decides, you know what, I'm ready to do an inurnment. I'm ready to bury it in a columbarium or whatever, because the physical remains, that's not where they are anymore.
Right.
And I've made that journey. The altar has helped me to do that. And now to truly honor them and honor where our relationship is now, I need to put the ashes truly to rest. And then that maybe becomes the 1 year anniversary honoring, so we talked a lot about what that arc looks like and how an altar, because an altar is a very physical, comforting representation of the loved one. An altar that is refreshing throughout our grief journey can be a wonderful benchmark and help us. And as long as it's a comfort, it's perfect. And the minute it's not quite comfortable anymore, it's not feeling quite right, that's a request to refresh.
I love that so much. And I know that we are so on the same page. As you say, you are your own grief expert. If your well-meaning relatives are saying, don't you think it's time to put that stuff away? It's like, no, actually it isn't. I'll know. I don't know. Well, it makes me uncomfortable when I come in here. It's like, well, then look the other way. Like, it's not right. It's not about providing comfort for someone else if that's what you need in your grief journey.
Yeah. I actually had a client who had a situation not unlike what you're describing. And that for her was oh, I need to refresh the altar because the altar needs to move from being in such a public place to being in a more private place. Because this is her speaking. I don't like that somebody is judging the space. So my choice is to keep the space very sacred. And so my choice is to move the space to a more private location. And again, we get the indicators of when it's time to refresh. And if we're listening to our inner cue instead of listening to or reacting to the external cue, right? Yeah. Because the reality is the person who's saying that's too uncomfortable, whatever, they're speaking about where their grief is.
Of course.
Right. And their grief is at a particular place. When families lose a core family member, we'd like to think that we're going to come together and that we're going to grieve together and that we'll be each other's balm, BALM.
Yes.
Calm each other. And the truth is that the death more often than not is a bomb, BOMB, in the family.
Yes.
So I talk quite a lot about the bomb versus the bomb, because we need to acknowledge that everybody's going to grieve this loss differently and each unique grief is valid.
Oh my goodness, yes.
How do we walk with each other, respectful of each other? That's the compassionate grief community. How do we do this even as we are hurting? We continue to check in on what's true for us. And so when this became an issue for this one client, it became a fascinating conversation about, well, let's unpack this. Let's find what's true here. I'm really hurt that my family member said this. I'm going through all of this stuff. So we needed to unpack kind of that layer of the conversation. And then we got to this really beautiful nugget about that at the end of the day, I need the altar to be honored and respected. If this person can't do that because of where they are, I also want to honor their grief journey.
Sure.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find what the next refresh step is on the altar, and it'll be an evolution of the altar. And
That's
then it
just,
became
it's, yeah.
different pictures because it was in a different spot. It became more about clothing and a blanket, you know, so that it became more about
Mm.
tactile comfort.
Beautiful, beautiful. And here is the other thing that is also challenging for people to wrap their heads around when you're, I'm just thinking of a conversation I had with my mom. When you're looking back or relationships in the past, sometimes you've made up stories in the past, or like your beliefs, and you've had a certain thing that's happened, and the other person's like, what are you talking about? That's not how it was in our home. What do you mean? So like everybody has a very different perspective of, you know, what it was like growing up. Oh, the relationship you had with your older brother, maybe you're really tight, maybe he picked on the other sibling a lot, so they're like, he was always mean to me. And the other one's like, what are you talking about? He was so nice. I remember I was talking to my mom, and my kids can't hear this. Well, I guess they know. I used to be a little feisty in high school. I don't know if that is a shock to you. And I said, oh my God, Mom, do you
Really?
remember like I used to stay out really, really late one weekend, and then the next weekend I was grounded because I stayed out past curfew, and then I went out again, then I was grounded. And my mom's like, what are you talking about? I don't remember any of that stuff. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, are you really? Said, no, I don't remember that at all. And then she was talking about a certain relative, and I'm thinking, oh, they were so sweet. And she's like, oh, no, they weren't. We all have very different experience, even in the same household, very different experiences and unique ways to express our grief, our whatever, like our happiness, sadness, whatever. So to compare just creates excessive suffering, doesn't it? To judge,
Yeah. There's no place for that in grief, right?
there is
And
no place for that in grief.
and what you're identifying is that the relationships are completely different going into grief. So why would
Yes.
they be completely different in the grief journey? Of course
And
they're going to
mourning.
be different. And that's the place where you telling your story and sharing your story helps me to see into a part of the person that I couldn't see when we were in physical relationship because I had my blinders on to what I expected them to be and who I knew them to be in our relationship. So it's an
Absolutely.
opportunity to really discover and do a little bit of a treasure hunt through the stories to discover who our
Mm,
loved one is. Yeah.
yes. And truly to honor your own journey, right? Like when people say, why aren't you crying? I don't know. Do you want me to like get me some onions? I don't know. Like I'm not crying right now. What do you want me to do?
Yeah.
And then you look at someone else. Why can't you stop crying? Well, I don't know. I'm like, what do you want me to do?
Yeah.
Try to stuff my tears. It's just, it
Yeah.
is what it is.
What I share with my clients is a really helpful tool that I've discovered is because this is where my grief journey is now. So it frees them from deciding you never cry. It's just I'm not
Mm,
crying in front of you. This is the truth of my grief journey now. In
now,
this,
I love that. And it is in this moment. It is. And again, as I've shared with you, as my two children prepare to go to university after having kids at school for 30 years, or at school, at home for 30 years, because they have an older brother, I am so grateful to understand this journey and so grateful to know that I'm happy right now. And in 10 minutes, I could be triggered because I now know, you know, this weekend it will be marked 6 weeks before they leave. Now that, right, and yeah, that's not a long time. And I know as each week it gets closer, the emotions are more erratic. And thank goodness, I'm just gonna say, yeah, this is me right now. I'm a hot mess.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
What can I tell you?
I'm a hot mess right now, and then this is me right now. I'm laughing. I'm having
I'm
a. I'm so
laughing.
grateful that we're together, right?
Yes.
When we recognize that we don't need to attach to any moment of the journey, it
Mm.
actually makes the journey easier. It helps it to move with ease and grace when we recognize that we don't need to connect and then get really bogged down in any moment of the journey. If I'm depressed right now, that's okay. if I allow myself to be depressed and to just sit with it and allow it to move through me, as opposed to I am it, if I don't identify with it, but rather I allow it to move through me and teach me what it has to teach me about where the relationship is now, okay. Because I'm going to get sad that they're not in the physical. I'm going to get depressed that I'm alone or that I have to take out the garbage. I'm going to get angry that, you know, there's a reason it's this mix of emotions, and that anything can trigger any possible response. If instead of judging it or wishing it away, if I changed my focus to allow and not provide resistance to it, you feel and hear how much ease and grace there can be in that fundamental shift, which is why it's so important to say to people, this is my grief journey now, because it reinforces for me, this is where I am now. You know, if what I'm feeling is lonely right now, this is where I am now.
That is just, and it's so wonderful to have that language. And also when for me, when I am feeling that, I mean, I feel things, I feel them like just in the pit of my soul, like whether it's sadness or whatever. And in those moments, and I say, oh, I know the best thing I can do for myself is just be with this. And that is not easy. And I remind myself how it just feels, it's hard sometimes to sit with those and say, how difficult this feels right now is temporary. I will not always feel this heavy, this sad, this depressed, this whatever. And for me, I hold on to that because I think people are also afraid to feel depressed, afraid of their extreme anger. Because like, what if I'm always like this? And it's like, well, it's going to keep coming back. You know, it's kind of like wherever you go, there you are. If you don't give it that space, and I promise if you do, right? Nothing stays the same. Change is the only constant, and we can hold on to that. You're not always going to feel, it's not always going to feel this hard.
Well, the phrase I hear all the time, and I'm sure you do too, if I start crying, I'll never stop.
I'll never stop.
Which is exactly the mentality around, if I get angry, I won't stop being angry. If I really express my anger, it's going to go to rage and it will stay. It'll get stuck there. Our fear that we'll get stuck there is exactly what keeps it stuck there.
Oh, yes. Right? Did you hear that, everybody?
because we fight against it, so we actually lock it down, as opposed to, I'm depressed right now. I'm really depressed right now. I'm really angry right now.
Yeah.
And I really need to, you know, hit something, as Sally Field says.
Oh, yes. And Steel Magnolia. Hit her.
Yeah, I'm so angry. I just want to punch something until it hurts as much as I hurt.
Yes.
That's real. That's grief. Right? Yes. That's grief.
Yeah.
And then when we give that voice, what we've done is we've released it from our body. So that's the mourning, right? We've articulated it. We've gotten it out of our body. And when we convert that grief that we're holding on to into mourning and we express it out of our body, that's when we feel some release and relief.
I think most people have heard the saying, what we resist persists. Right now, and think of that in grief, in right, what we resist. Oh no, I am not feeling that. That's too much. It'll keep coming back one way or another. Oh, I love these conversations so very much. Honestly,
I do want to add one thing.
Yes.
You know, coming back in grief acts a little bit differently in that it gets buried and carried.
Yeah.
If we're really not going to deal with it, instead of it keep coming back, what happens is it starts getting pushed down. But also what happens is that the symptom, whether it's anger, whatever it is we're fighting, when we're pushing it down, that symptom hardens inside of us over time, right? It softens if we allow the expression of it. But when we bury and carry it, the symptom itself hardens until we start to discover that our life spark is dimming, right? We're not living with joy. We can't see joy. We can't be around joy. We don't even recognize it, right? And grief, as my teacher and mentor says, Dr. Alan Wofelt, he says, grief awaits welcome. It does not await time.
Right.
So that's the reason why it won't keep coming back, because it's not going to take you out or take you by surprise, but it will await your welcome. The good news is if you've buried and carried your grief, and you know you've buried and carried your grief, you can do catch-up mourning. What it requires is that we welcome it back up, so that as it bubbles up, we engage with it.
Right, absolutely. And in my, when I'm thinking of that, what we resist persists, in my head, it's like, it's not going to go away. It's going buried, and it's going down. Like, it's not, you're not, the more you ignore it, it's not, it's you think it's gone.
Yeah.
But it's just, yes. And we all know people, and I always say, we all know people who have a pulse and have lost, they're not really living.
Yeah.
Right? These conversations, see, we could talk forever. Or I was like, we're just going to talk for 15 minutes. That's it. Yeah, right. That's never going to happen. That is never going to happen, because this is just, it's so important. And I just love your perspective, your wisdom, and that you're just so willing to share it. So thank you, my friend.
Well, I love our conversations, and I love these dives, whether they be deep dives or surface dives. I just really value it. And I would remind people who are watching, if you find that we're identifying something for you, if you're recognizing I've got some buried and carried grief, I know what they're talking about, and you're needing support with it, you got two resources right here, right? We're right here, and we love being of support, because this is what we do, and what we love to do is to be loving support in your grief journey.
Absolutely. And I always tell people say, why would you choose this? I said, I didn't choose this. It chose me.
Yeah.
Because, but here's the thing about it, right? We are continuously learning, and truthfully, every time someone connects, I learn something more, and I'm so grateful. And so absolutely, I always welcome anyone to connect, and yeah, that's how we can support one another in our compassionate grief communities.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So happy traveling, my friend. Have a very great rest of your week. Actually, we're going to speak in 2 weeks. And yes. And gee, I wonder if we'll find something to talk about next time. I don't know. We'll see if we can.
I'm pretty sure we'll find something.
I think we'll be good. I think we'll be good. Namaste. Bye for now. I love you, my friend.
I love you too. Namaste.